The third and final capability we're going to talk about is relationship governance. So this was the third biggest gap. It was actually ranked fifth in terms of importance to the buyers, but again, had a gap of about 26% between the importance that buyers placed and their assessment of the reality of delivery. Some of the key themes that buyers raised in interview they wanted to see around relationship governance were more openness with third parties. So I think that plays to your open house, open source kind of comments, truly global solutions and better pricing solutions. So let's just start again with the question on why. Why do we think that gap exists between the importance placed and buyers' assessment of the reality of delivery?
With a lot of the changes that have been coming in from the airlines and the funding to the TMCs, there is some smoke and mirrors around how or what funding there is with the TMCs and the importance and the reliance on whatever incentives they get from suppliers. So I think that could drive some of that, actually.
If you're responsible for a programme, as in both on the TMC side and the corporation side, there is a responsibility mutually to have clarity around the objective or the objectives, the measurements that you want to use to track progress against those objectives, and then clarity in terms of roles and responsibilities to be absolutely clear with each other around what you're doing to deliver on that programme, who's responsible for what, and then very regular and open dialogue, and then the ability to create an environment that allows for open dialogue, transparency, which drives trust.
It's really critical that as a corporation, you really open up and share what is the strategy of the organisation. And if your TMC partner doesn't know that, how can you hold them account to something that they're not aware of or what's going to deliver what's right for your organisation? And that relationship has to be both parts. You have to share that. And also, I think what a TMC has, and I really think this is a great opportunity as buyers, as they're looking for, is thought leadership. They're looking for consultancy. They're looking beyond just the transaction.
I think you raise a really good point there. I wonder how many travel buyers or travel teams share their objectives with the TMC or their personal objectives. I mean, if it's a SME, the individual you deal with, I think sharing that information actually makes you collectively successful for sure. One
of the things that I'm sure many TMCs do is actually look at making sure that you're given feedback as a TMC about how you're performing against other vendors in other categories. And what best practice looks like within a corporation is where they share that information, and many of our customers do. Benchmarking yourself against other vendors in other categories to make sure that you're always recalibrating the relationship, the programme, the deliverables, the best practices in other segments to continue to strengthen it and reiterate the relationship and the programme.
If you look at other categories that you manage within the business, if you can identify a high performing, where there's high expectation, high delivery, whatever you're doing there, you can translate into the travel category. Do you think that there is something within the remuneration method between the corporate and the TMC that sort of forces it down that transactional route instead of something that's more strategic, where there's more alignment, and that actually what we saw was a tide after the pandemic to challenge the remuneration methodology, but that's kind of not, it hasn't really translated into anything substantial?
Broad brush, the economic model is broken and has been for a long time. I am the first to have said the best thing that ever happened to this industry was the removal of commissions. There's an element of distrust in the community around the economic model, and it should be based on paying a fee, whatever model, and I think there have been opportunities to relook at that completely, and it's really disappointing that that hasn't come to fruition. Different fee structures, etc., because I think it does create that distrust, Paul, for many, not all, whereby sometimes you have to think, you know, is the TMC working on behalf of the interests of the corporate?
It's about transparency on, us as a corporate sharing our objectives and our drivers and what's important to us, but the TMC doing the same, because that's where you ultimately need to have that alignment, because where you're what's core and fundamentally important to that TMC and the direction they're heading in, if that isn't misaligned with you, then you're going to continue to have that relationship issues, really, around governance and everything else.
And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But 100%, we have a responsibility to articulate that, so therefore the service proposition is packaged to deliver against that which is then measured.
If a programme's not meeting expectations, that's a failure on both parties, because it's a mutually shared challenge, isn't it? Creating a programme that's fit for purpose and a governance structure sits on the TMC and the company that they serve. And if that's not where it needs to be, then that's a failing relationship.
There's a consideration here as well, though, about bringing the other suppliers into that mix. Because we're talking about the TMC to the corporate, but actually, with what the airlines are doing at the moment, I think they should be part of these discussions as well more, and it should be three-way, and even with hotels as well, and some of the tech companies out there. So I think it should be perhaps broadened too, because I think that's what's a challenge at the minute, is we're speaking collectively TMC corporate, collectively airline corporate, but there's not the three-way. And I just wonder if that's something we should be considering more of at the minute as well.
It's about bringing everyone around the table. Everyone should have a seat around the table. So everyone is heading in the right direction, or you're open to discuss what those challenges are and then have a programme to try and better understand them, and two, how can we mitigate them? How can we find alternative solutions? But that can't happen in different conversations being held in different rooms, right?
We've seen it with NDC connectivity around the world. If we look at what's happening in France with Air France KLM, a very positive set of activities developing as a result of TMCs, the GDS, and the airline and the customer voice all getting around the table to have meaningful conversations around how to bring that to life in a very structured, pragmatic way, that when that happens, you actually start to get some progress. And then you have other examples around the world. I won't get into countries, but there are examples where that's not happening and the pace is much slower, and that becomes a challenge, and then we'll drive a frustration, and then we won't be meeting expectations. So bringing the ecosystem together is absolutely the right thing to do. It's progressive.
It's so interesting that how many times do you hear in this industry a call for collaboration, more collaboration, and yet we're saying this is really the first time we're seeing beyond linear conversations with multiple stakeholders
with
coming
NDC.
together. Yeah.
Well, we've got something to work with.
I think if it doesn't, it breeds failure. I honestly do believe that. And every time all parties get together, that has to be good from an industry perspective and also for an individual corporate programme or a TMC. There's got to be a collective benefit.
Anything else on relationship governance before I hand over to Karen?
90-day cycles.
90-day cycles.
Get much more focused on shorter-term objectives to deliver momentum and actually deliver results, because, as an industry, and we talked about it earlier on, but we do need to unpack some of the challenges that we have and get much more granular in our understanding about what they are, and then shorten the time horizon so that we take smaller steps towards delivery.
In the research was rated low as an importance, and yet there was a big gap. And we see this continuously, that a lot of buyers, definitely not the ones we have in the room today, it's not a focus for them. And so I think probably one of the most important things that will come out of this discussion and this part of the box set will be, what is governance? And Jason, I think you did a really good job of articulating that sort of clarity of objectives, measurements, roles and responsibilities, the cadence of open dialogue, and how you can just even summarise that on one page, that together as you enter a new relationship to say, or any existing relationship, this is what governance is going to be, and here's how we're going to go down this path together. An insight for you, when a lot of our clients come to us and say they want to go out to TMC bid, the first words before that will say, my TMC isn't working today, Therefore, I need your help to help us find another one. It's not all the time, but I'd say probably at least half. And our conversation time is, hang on a minute, you might not need another TMC. It might be actually you're not managing them effectively. And it's a little bit of a, what do you mean we might not be managing them effectively? So we sometimes do a relationship assessment, which is a little bit like marriage guidance counselling, where you give both sides of the relationship the opportunity to sort of rate the relationship. And sometimes it comes back actually the buyer is the blocker. And sometimes it comes back that the TMC is the blocker, right? You never, or it might be both. But creating that environment where you really have that clarity of what matters most and what we're going to go after, and then get into that cadence of every 90 days, in certainly my experience and everything I've seen across our customer base, that's what makes a high-performing relationship.